The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
A massive rail yard expansion is displacing residents in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood. But are they getting a fair deal? For Governor Rauner and Mayor Emanuel, the new year is off to a rocky start. They exchanged tough words over Chicago police shootings and state funding for city schools. And it's the right time. These visually impaired workers run one of the largest clock manufacturing facilities in the country. Stay with us for these stories and more tonight on In the Loop. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lauren Cohn. Progress often comes with a price, and some longtime residents of a fragile, shrinking community in Englewood are paying the price of progress to make way for a railroad's expansion. The city supports the plan because it means more tax revenue. The railroad says it will bring economic benefits, and residents are caught in the crosshairs.
I love you.
Deborah Payne lives in a small section of the Englewood neighborhood in this little yellow house with her husband, Joe. They've been here for 35 years.
That was some wonderful years.
Yeah.
The Paynes have lots of good memories from those years of living on West 57th Street. But these days, their neighborhood is surrounded by the constant rumble of passing freight trains. Norfolk Southern Railroad wants to expand its rail yard operations south from Garfield or 55th Street down to 61st Street, covering about 84 acres. The Payne's house and a few others are in the way.
My fight about this being a railroad yard is the way they did it.
Payne is upset because she says the railroad and the city never consulted first with area residents about the plan. She is seen here in a 2013 documentary called The Area, trying to organize her neighbors against the expansion plan.
Y'all live in the area? I need you all to talk to these people about how the railroad is aggressively buying our property.
The documentary was put together by University of Chicago graduate student David Chaliol.
I felt that it was really critical to come in and do something about what was happening here.
Norfolk Southern needs more space to handle the explosive growth of intermodal shipping. Chicago plays a major role in it. Somewhere around $3 trillion worth of goods loaded into giant steel containers move through this region each year. Everything from flat-screen TVs to dishwashers to clothing are carried inside. The containers travel on massive ships across the oceans, arriving at U.S. ports, where they get unloaded, transferred to trucks or trains to continue their journey across the country. The major railroads operate 19 intermodal yards in the Chicago area, and the business is up 27% over the past 5 years. The largest operation is just southwest of Chicago in Will County, where 2 massive rail yards covering about 6,000 acres are in operation around the clock. There's a steady line of container trucks outside the rail yard waiting to be loaded or unloaded. Aerial photos show how quickly the area went from mostly farmland to rail and industrial warehouse space in a matter of just a few short years. John Grueling is the president and CEO of the Will County Center for Economic Development.
In Will County, the intermodal business started just about 15 years ago, and I like to say we went from 0 to 3 million in that 15 years.
3 million is the number of containers that pass through the twin rail yards each year. Trucks then haul those containers to nearby distribution warehouses.
This is the most efficient way in freight transportation to move product in and out of this country.
Well-known retail names such as Home Depot, Dollar Tree, and Walmart have established huge facilities in Will County to handle the incoming freight. An estimated 20,000 new jobs have been created as a result.
We clearly have found the edge in logistics and transportation.
Besides creating jobs, the intermodal industry pumps millions of dollars in tax revenue into Will County. That's why the Englewood project is so attractive to the city of Chicago. Tax revenue from an expanded rail yard where currently there are numerous empty lots could be as much as $100 million, according to 20th Ward Alderman Willie Cochran. Cochran, who represents the Englewood neighborhood, supports the expansion and says it will bring new employment opportunities to the area.
We are creating careers by putting that railroad station here in Chicago, in the Englewood community.
Norfolk Southern issued a statement saying the expanded Railyard is expected to create 400 jobs and have a regional economic impact of $1.6 billion by 2030.
We're not going to get none of those jobs they get there.
Bringing no jobs at all. This is a lie.
The railroad has been quietly purchasing properties in Englewood for nearly 10 years and demolishing homes. One of those houses was once owned by Beverly Russell.
But I love this little place, and it's sad to see it's gone. This is my home. This is where it was.
Beverly planted an evergreen tree. She had a garden. She got married inside the house that once stood here. Neighbors say it was a tight-knit community, but things are changing quickly as the railroad gobbles up home after home.
The obvious thing that's being lost is this community, and it really is a special community. Hey, how you doing, sir? Good to see you.
Deborah Payne says she understands that progress is necessary. She's just angry about the way it was all handled.
I think they thought the majority of the people were ignorant and they was going to just go.
Hundreds of neighborhood residents did go, taking the railroad's buyout offers and moved on. But about a dozen families are still holding onto their homes till the bitter end, including Deborah and her husband Joe.
I'm going to be right here. And when people need me, I'm going to be right there to help them.
Norfolk Southern has already acquired more than 96% of the properties it needs to move ahead with its expansion plans. There are 12 parcels of land remaining, including the Payne's house. The railroad has made final offers to purchase those remaining properties. If agreements cannot be reached with the property owners, then eminent domain proceedings could begin within 90 days. Now here's a look at more stories making headlines this week. The tension is rising between Governor Rauner and Mayor Emanuel over the city's handling of police shootings in public schools.
I am very disappointed in the mayor and in the state's attorney for Cook County. Very disappointed.
Cheating to gain admission. Families using false addresses to attend selective enrollment high schools could be forced to pay back tuition.
If all schools were good throughout the neighborhoods, that wouldn't really be a factor. But we do know that there's neighborhoods that have very poor schools.
There should be actions taken because they're taking spots away from children who should receive some type of advantages and are not receiving them.
President Obama invoked the young victims of mass shootings as he outlined new gun control measures. Will the new rules have an impact on gun violence in Chicago?
Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad. And by the way, it happens on the streets of Chicago every day.
Joining us for this week's panel are Ron Sandak, State Representative for the 81st District, Nikisha Hobbs, Principal and co-founder of Village Leadership Academy, and Dr. Alana Baum, Psychologist and Adjunct Professor at Northwestern University Medical School. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So let's begin with a rocky start in 2016 for Mayor Emanuel. And Ron, the governor saying if a recall hits his desk, he'll sign it. Surprised by this?
I'm not surprised by it. Obviously the governor doesn't legislate. He signs or doesn't sign legislation as it comes before him. Obviously the relationship between the gentlemen is complex. It goes back many years. But as we sit here right now, Chicago has, a challenging leadership issue before it. Representative Ford has brought forth a bill, which I am a chief co-sponsor on. And I think, by the way, not just to pick on Mayor Emanuel, recall makes sense for any legislator or any elected official. Giving people the right to govern and question whether they made choices that were wise or not, and then recall for bad choices seems to make sense to me and is in the ken of democracy.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the relationship between Governor Rauner and Rahm Emanuel, because it was not too long ago that we all saw the photo of the two of them sharing wine in the vineyards, and now they're sparring with each other. Nikisha, would you call this political posturing?
First of all, it does not surprise me that Governor Rauner would support a recall bill. He supports term limits, things of that nature. So that does not surprise me. I do think that this is political posturing, though, because if this bill actually does reach the governor's desk, it will already be veto-proof. And I know there's a lot of conversation around the legal ramifications of this bill in general. So in some ways, I do think it's political posturing. Obviously, Governor Rauner wants to loosen the Democratic stronghold, or the stronghold that Madigan has over the House of Representatives. And so partnering or standing in alliance with the African American community right now is definitely beneficial for him.
So, Alana, what he's looking for is help from Rauner and Mayor and getting his turnaround agenda passed. Rauner and Mayor started the year rocky. One of his aides was beat up. We had another police-involved shooting. Betty Jones was killed on the west side. We've got protests at his house. Is it time for Rauner and Mayor to go? Or do we want to see a recall, or should we give him a chance here to fix things?
I absolutely think that we need to give this mayor a chance for a number of reasons. One, we're talking about what the context is in which Rauner and Emanuel are engaged in this fight. It's to everyone's point, there's nothing shocking here. The governor needs the mayor to support his efforts at anti-union reforms and help him with the Democratic state legislature. He knows the city needs money for our schools. Where they're similar is that both of these men inherited probably the most huge financial disasters. I'm sure they each went in the first day and were choking on what they saw. The difference is that for Governor Rauner, his positions do not create any problems for him with his base. He risks nothing. He can go in and he can say, look, we have no money. We can cut, it's not great, but we could cut services for the poor. We could, use the students as pawns. We can go after the union to save costs. I think the larger message here and the greater headline really is, it's really almost impossible for a centrist Democrat right now, and a centrist Democrat mayor who on one hand supports and believes in financial responsibility, supports educational accountability, but is also pro-workers' rights, also believes you have to find money, even if we have none, for basic services for people who need them, who believes you really can't use students as pawns. So basically what you have for centrist Democrats is that the second a mistake happens, which if you're trying to do anything, right, a mistake's going to happen, you have the left pummeling you, right, for being too pro-business, and the right pummeling you, and I think that's the situation he's in now. But his record has to count.
We end up then being stalled, Ron, and we end up now facing a situation where Governor Rauner is not going to give Rahm Emanuel the money he needs for Chicago public schools. We could see layoffs coming. We've got a real problem with the school system, and this is just never ending. Sparring on both sides, we are stalled.
We are stalled, and that's unfortunate. And I take a little umbrage to the media calling any position with respect to CPS taking hostages. We're at a standstill with respect to CPS, and maybe we'll get into the financial challenges they've had. Those were decades in the making. The question now is how to fix a really intolerable situation, and it's been intolerable for Chicago citizens and the students for so many years. There are opportunities amid this crazy for some actual steps forward, but it's going to take people to get out of their comfort zones, and that includes the mayor of Chicago. I do agree with Alana's comments about a centrist Chicago mayor being pulled in both directions, but he's going to have to get out of his comfort zone, and he's going to have to take positions that maybe face some of his former alliances to get things done. The fact is that the state of Illinois, by the way, doesn't have $500 million to give CPS in a check. We have our own serious financial difficulties that have been decades in the making as well.
Nikki, should we even be giving them the money with all the problems that CPS has faced? I mean, we're heading into a year where we just got Inspector General's reports talking about family members lying to put their kids in, better schools. Yeah. Should we bail them out?
We absolutely should bail CPS out. The truth of the matter is the governor of the state of Illinois as well as the mayor of the city of Chicago are both responsible for making sure that every child in this state has access to public education. And not only that every child has access to public education, as a first-class city, we should be making sure that they all have access to a high quality public education. And so what we see happening is students in the city of Chicago do not have access to high quality education. And so you see people doing whatever it takes to get their students and their young people into selective enrollment schools. Every school really in the city of Chicago should be a great place for every student. As it relates to other folks coming from suburbs or other places to enroll children in the CPS schools, I think we absolutely need measures in place to hold folks accountable, because honestly, the citizens of Chicago, the people who are applying for high school here, do not have a lot of quality options.
I found it interesting because in the Inspector General's report, he says he recommends that kids that are found doing this with their parents should be kicked out, tuition should be repaid. Is that harsh, or?
Well, I think you have to be careful with that. I think you always have to be careful when you're punishing kids for the sins of parents. If you're ripping kids mid-high school out of their schools, away from friends, away from teachers, maybe it serves as a deterrent for other parents, but it's at a cost to students. And for a city to be making those decisions, and as a therapist, I would say this as well, I think that's probably going too far, because you can't do that to kids. Yeah. Having said that, I do think there have to be tighter controls and more enforcement. Again, I think there's a larger headline here, and I think the larger headline for all of us is that there needs to be more and better school options in this city. And I was saying before, context matters. I think whether you're talking about the video that was released and the handling of that, context matters here, in that it's not like all of a sudden Mayor Emanuel is saying, oh, we have to start caring about minority kids. This is a mayor who from day one risked a lot of political capital to try to say it's not okay that our kids are not reading and doing math at grade level. It's not okay that there aren't more high school options. He's expanded international baccalaureate programs, which the U of C studies have shown that if you go to an IB program, you're 40% more likely than someone who doesn't to get into a higher, better four-year college.
So there are some good things that the mayor has done, but the mayor has also been under fire in terms of his handling of the recent shooting of Laquan McDonald, and is working with the police department, his control of the IPRA. So even if we see some recommendations, Ron, within CPD coming in the new year, there is still the element of what he knew, what's coming out in the emails that staffers knew, that paint a bad picture for the mayor.
Look, ultimately, he's responsible. He's the person in charge. Obviously, I have some, I empathize with someone about things that happen at different levels in an organization as large and as complex as the city of Chicago. CPD's had issues forever, it seems like. But these things now need to be handled in a way that's been completely different than what's happened in the past. It's troubling when you turn on your TV and you see what's going on in Chicago with the police. It troubles me. I'm a suburban person, but I grew up in Chicago. I went to school in Chicago. I love the city. What's happening is troubling to me. Ultimately, whether it's his fault or not, and even if it isn't, and I suspect much of it isn't, he's accountable. He has to own it. And something needs to be done dramatically different than what's happened in the past. Otherwise, he's going to own it all, and he's going to be blamed.
Is there a trust, though, to make that happen?
Well, let's face it, the citizens of the city of Chicago are not happy with this mayor, and they're not happy with this mayor for a lot of different reasons. This is a mayor who closed 50 schools. The community tried to provide feedback on that. That feedback was not heard. There's a lot of disappointment around that. There's disappointment about the decision to close so many mental health institutions. In this Laquan McDonald video, I think is just really the breaking point for a lot of citizens in Chicago. And I think for people nationally, this story has gotten a lot of national attention because it is absolutely not okay for a murder to be covered up in any shape, form, or fashion. And when that happens, people do have to be held accountable. The mayor is responsible for running the city of Chicago, and he also, any elected official also has to be held accountable for their actions or inactions.
I want to move on to the new executive order from the president regarding stricter gun controls. Let me just move on to this topic, Alana, and bring up the fact that he's talking about expanding background checks to curb the violence. Statistics, we saw 3,000 people as victims of gun violence this past year. Illinois has one of the strictest gun laws of any state, background checks as well. So will this make a difference here in Chicago?
I know you want me to stay with this topic, and I really actually think there is a big connection here. But I think context matters. I think it matters for the gun laws. I think it matters for the Laquan video the shooting and how it was handled by this mayor. And I think that's not getting discussed enough, and that's relevant for both of these topics. So I just want to add that I think what isn't getting discussed enough is that right now, as we speak this year, the world is changing. Video changes everything. Before Eric Garner in New York, before Walter Scott in South Carolina, now with Laquan McDonald, these are terrible things happening for decades. But until this point, good leaders in government around the country followed the premise that the rule of thumb was you do not share sensitive information with the public during an ongoing investigation. And that is what happened here. City Hall did not withhold the video from investigators. The federal investigation was not delayed. It started very quickly after the shooting. What he did, mayors around this country have and would have done up until this very thing happened, because that's how it was done. What we are realizing now, and very importantly so, is that more than jeopardizing the case, the outcry from these videos, more than risking jeopardizing the case, the outcry can actually bring some political wind to allow things that couldn't happen before to happen now.
Okay, well, I want to jump back, speaking of political wind. Let's just get back to the issue of gun control, Ron. Is it going to make a difference here in Chicago? How is it going to affect us?
Sure, I hope so. I hope it does. But as your question stated, Illinois is pretty restrictive. In fact, it may be the most restrictive state as far as background checks. Clearly, people of goodwill, irrespective of where you are on the issue of guns, don't want people with mental illness. We don't want people that have felonies, domestic violence, people that have done things that show a propensity for violence. And Illinois has a pretty good track record insofar as the new laws are concerned. The bottom line here is, and I have two problems with what the president did. I do not question his motivation, none whatsoever. I remember when he was Senator Obama, candidate Obama, criticizing then President Bush about executive orders and going around the legislative process. I'm a big D democracy person. I always worry when we start getting edicts from above. Again, I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat about how things should be. The rule of law should be the rule of law in the ordinary course. And I also question, are bad people with bad intent going to get a FOID card or get a concealed carry license? The answer is no.
So a criminal's still going to be able to sell out of the trunk of a car.
They still do what they do, and it's not going to change that. But I'm still hopeful.
But Nikisha, does it change, though, when you have an executive order like this for states that are weak in terms of background checks? Indiana, because a 2014 CPD and University of Chicago report showed 60% of guns used in Chicago crimes came from out of state.
Yeah. So I think, number one, I think it's not ideal for President Obama to have to use an executive order, but we know that he has not abused that power. He's used executive orders far less than other presidents have, and so that's not an issue. We see our governor here in the state of Illinois making emergency rule changes using his executive power, and so I just want to point that out.
But it's not unchecked. There's a big difference.
Well,
the governor still has to go through a process in Illinois. There's almost very little in common between a governor and a president. One has far more expansive abilities. There is some executive privilege, but it's this compared to the
I'm just going
presidential.
back to the comment about context, right? Definitely different contexts, but very similar things happening in terms of use of executive order.
Well, I wish we could talk more about this. We're out of time. You know, wonderful comments from all of you. I want to thank you all for coming. Ron Sandak, Nikisha Hobbs, and Dr. Alana Baum, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
70% of visually impaired people are unemployed, but one Chicago organization is giving vision to those looking for a better way of life. Chris Bury has that story.
Have a good day, Nick. See you, Julie.
5 days a week, Nick Savellis begins his morning commute with a 5:30 train from North Suburban Elgin. After nearly 2 hours on the train and then a bus ride, he walks 3 blocks to his job at the Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired on Chicago's West Side. He is a materials handler at the Lighthouse's clock factory. For more than 100 years, the Lighthouse has provided jobs and training for those without some or all of their sight. The mission here, helping the visually impaired see what is possible in their lives.
This is my first real job. When I got out of college, as I said, I was looking for a job for a couple of years, and successfully, because my vision was a limitation in snagging some of these jobs I was looking for, because they wanted somebody who could drive, or they wanted somebody who could read faster than I can read. You know, I mean, I can read, but I read very slowly, you know.
Savalas knew his vision loss would make it hard to find a good-paying job. Legally blind, he has only about 60% of his sight.
All right, when I was 10, I had a brain tumor. Went up to Mill Clinic in Minnesota, and they treated it with radiation, and that went over very well as far as getting rid of the tumor. But the problem was that the radiation did some damage to the optic nerve, apparently. A few years later, the damage started to manifest as far as my vision loss, you know. So at age 14 is when I started to lose my vision, and I've lost it in a couple of stages. I lost a chunk of it at 14, and more of it just maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Savalas did not let his lack of sight handicap his motivation. Since 2008, he's been working alongside others who have trouble seeing at the Lighthouse's clock factory. Vice President Jean-Claude Kepler oversees the operation.
We have over 85% of our people are legally blind. Wall clocks we've been producing since 1977, and we sell to both the commercial and the federal sector, and we produce about 200,000 units a year. We are one of the last major clock manufacturers left in the United States.
And that distinction has helped keep the factory humming. Its annual sales now add up to more than $3 million a year, money that helps pay for the nonprofit's programs. A third of its business comes from contracts with the federal government. One of the Lighthouse clocks even survived the 9/11 attack.
They found one of our clocks that actually was, stopped and half melted because of the fires and everything else. And it's now on display in New York at the 9/11 memorial.
Savalas and the other workers assemble, package, and test every clock. The factory also makes calendars, planners, and wall thermometers. Mylan Jerkin is the plant manager. Like Savalas, with his impaired vision, Jerkin struggled to find a job, even after graduating from Loyola University with straight A's. But the Lighthouse and the clock factory have given him hope.
Blindness is a terrible condition, but it's something that, given the tools and devices and assistance and understanding, it is something you can get past. It comes a lot easier to bear when you know you have a roof over your head and your refrigerator is fully stocked. So you can get on with life.
Thanks, Chris. And we will continue the discussion about President Obama's executive order on gun control online at wycc.org. So log on now. And that wraps up tonight's show. You are now in the loop. To learn more about our show and our guests, visit us at wycc.org and search the link for In the Loop. Until next week, I'm Lauren Cohn. Have a good night.